On July 13th, 2026, the world received news it was not ready to hear. Sam Neill was gone. He was 78, and his family described the loss as sudden and unexpected. Just weeks earlier, he had looked into a television camera and said, "There is no cancer in my body," after years of treatment for a rare blood cancer. His family said he had remained cancer-free. No public cause of death was immediately given. That timing made the news difficult to absorb. Neill had been talking about another film. He had appeared in public and shared ordinary scenes from his farm. Nothing in those final images looked like a farewell. Tributes arrived from 2 prime ministers and from actors who had known him for decades. One friend said she was devastated because the last time they spoke, he had been going so well. Another asked people online to tell her the report was not real. But this is not only a story about a death. It is a story of a boy named Nigel, born in Northern Ireland and raised in New Zealand, who became one of the most familiar faces on Earth while refusing to let Hollywood decide who he really was. Who was the man behind DR? Alan Grant? And why did someone in the world associated with dinosaurs spend his final decades protecting family, animals, vines, and a patch of land at the bottom of the world? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to Oma, a voyage across the world, and a name he chose to leave behind. He was not born Sam. He was born Nigel John Dermot Neill on September 14, 1947, in Oma, a town in County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. His mother was English. His father was a New Zealander, a man who was serving in the British Army when his son came into the world. So from the very first day of his life, this child belonged to more than one place, and fully to none of them. That would turn out to be the quiet, defining fact of his entire existence, though no one holding that infant in Oma could have guessed it yet. When Nigel was 7 years old, in 1954, the family left Northern Ireland behind and sailed to the other side of the planet. They settled in Christchurch, on the South Island of New Zealand, a country that in the middle of the 20th century sat about as far from the centers of glamour and power as any place on Earth. For a small boy, it was an enormous rearrangement of the world. A new hemisphere, a new set of accents around him, a new idea of where home was supposed to be. He was a child who had already been carried once across an ocean, and something in him would spend the next 7 decades trying to settle the question that move planted in him. Where do I actually belong? He was, by his own account, a quiet child. And there was a specific reason for that quiet, one he carried privately for years before he ever spoke of out loud. As a boy, Sam Neill had a severe stutter. He said much later that he was largely silent as a child, that he did not want adults to speak to him at all, because he knew he would not be able to reply. Sit with that for a second. One of the most recognizable voices in film and television, a man who would one day narrate documentaries and hold his own in scenes opposite Meryl Streep and Sean Connery, spent his childhood afraid of being spoken to. The stutter did not begin to loosen its grip until he was around 14 or 15. And when it finally faded, he later said, it faded alongside something else that was arriving at the same time. Confidence. The sense that he could move through the world after all. Then there was the matter of the name. Somewhere around the age of 12, Nigel decided that Nigel was simply not a name he wanted to carry through life. There were several other Nigels at his school, and he found, in his own words, that he moved more easily through the world as a Sam. He would make a joke of it for the rest of his life. Imagine, he once said, being a movie actor named Nigel Neill. But underneath the joke is something that tells you almost everything about the man he became. Before he had ever stood in front of the camera, before anyone had offered him a single role, he had already reached in and rewritten his own name. He decided who he was going to be. He did not wait for the world to hand him an identity. That instinct to keep the definition of himself in his own 2 hands would repeat again and again across the whole arc of his life. He was schooled in Christchurch. and eventually went on to university there. But the road to acting was neither straight nor obvious. Sam Neill did not grow up dreaming of the screen. His principal studies at university were in English, and at one point he tried his hand at law. He would later describe that year of law with a single, blunt word: catastrophic. He remembered the deadening tedium of it, the sense of a young man's mind slowly going numb. It was a false start, an honest wrong turn, exactly the kind of detail that gets sanded out of the polished version of a famous life. He was a young man at the bottom of the world, without a clear map, trying things and abandoning them, looking for the one thing that would finally hold him. And here's the part that is easy to overlook from where we stand now, looking back at a career of more than 150 screen roles. When Sam Neill was young, there was barely a film industry in New Zealand to speak of. There were no obvious stepping stones. There was no clear path from a lecture hall in Christchurch to a soundstage anywhere in the world. Years later, one prime minister of his adopted country would put it plainly, saying that Neill had started out when there was hardly a film industry in New Zealand at all, and that over more than 50 years he had helped build that industry into one of the nation's greatest cultural exports. But the young man did not know any of that was coming. He only knew that the law had nearly killed something in him, and that he needed to find another door. He began working on the stage while still at Canterbury University. He drifted into television work and short films in New Zealand. And slowly, without any guarantee that would ever add up to life, he started to become an actor. The boy who had once been too afraid to answer an adult was learning, quietly, how to hold a room. The work before fame was practical and often unglamorous. Neill spent time with the New Zealand National Film Unit, where he learned how stories were assembled from both sides of the camera. He acted, narrated, wrote, and directed short material. That experience mattered. He did not arrive in international cinema as someone who believed an actor was the only important person on a set. He understood crews, schedules, editing rooms, weather, budgets, and the patience required to make anything at all in a country where resources were limited. Colleagues would later describe the same quality in him on much larger productions. He knew the work was collective, and he did not need the room to revolve around him. New Zealand also gave him something Hollywood could not manufacture, a cultural distance from the idea of stardom. He could become internationally successful and still return to a place where celebrity was met with humor rather than ceremony. That distance helped shape the dry public manner audiences came to love. He rarely spoke as though success had proved anything about his worth. Awards became material for jokes. Titles sounded too grand. Even when New Zealand formally honored him, he carried the recognition lightly. The performance ended when the camera stopped. The person remained. For most of the world, the story of Sam Neill's body is a story that begins in 2022. And it begins cruelly at the exact moment he was being celebrated. He was out promoting Jurassic World Dominion, returning one more time to the role that had made him a household name 3 decades earlier. It should have been a victory lap. The reunion of the original cast. The familiar faces, older now, stepping back into a world audiences had loved since 1993. Instead, in the middle of all that publicity, Sam Neill noticed something wrong. There were lumps in his neck, swollen glands that had no business being there. The kind of small, physical wrongness that a person can talk themselves out of for exactly as long as it takes to see a doctor. The diagnosis, when it came, was not gentle. Angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, a rare and aggressive form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a blood cancer. Stage 3. For a man of 74, in the middle of what should have been a joyful return to the screen, it was a verdict that split his life cleanly into before and after. The world was watching DR. Alan Grant come back to the movies. It had no idea that the man playing him had just been handed one of the hardest fights of his life. He began chemotherapy in March of 2022. The treatment, in his own dry phrasing, was pretty miserable business. It initially brought the disease under control, but the uncertainty never fully left. Neill later explained that the medication, keeping him in remission, might one day stop working. His doctors had already told him what that would mean. They would have to try something else. He did not dramatize the possibility. He simply carried it, scan by scan, appointment by appointment, while continuing to work whenever his body allowed him to. And here is where the story turns in a way that is pure Sam Neill. Stuck in Sydney, going through chemotherapy, facing the very real possibility that he was running out of time, he did not go quiet. He picked up a pen. He began to write. What came out of those long treatment days became a memoir, published in 2023, called Did I Ever Tell You This? He was honest about why he started it. It was not, at first, some grand literary ambition. Writing, he admitted, gave him a reason to live. It was a task, a discipline, a way to fill the frightening hours with something other than fear. He said of that time that he simply did not know how long he had to live. So he wrote as if the writing itself could hold him to the world. The pages came quickly because he was not trying to produce a polished monument. He wrote in the voice he used at a dinner table. One memory leading to another, a colleague appearing, a mistake admitted, a joke arriving before the fear became too heavy. The work gave shape to days otherwise divided by treatment and waiting. Each morning offered a small, practical assignment. Remember something, write it down, keep going. That routine did not cure him. It gave him a reason to meet the next day. The memoir became less a farewell than evidence that he was still taking part in his own life. There was no grand announcement that the book would save him. Most days, it was simply a way to avoid sitting alone with the clock. A remembered scene became a page. A page became another afternoon completed. That modest rhythm suited him better than speeches about courage. He kept working because work was familiar, and familiarity gave the fear less room. When the book finally reached readers, its warmth came from that origin. It had been written by a man who was not trying to sound immortal. He was trying to stay occupied, honest, and alive. Think about what that reveals about the man. Faced with his own mortality, his instinct was not to retreat into silence, the way the frightened, stuttering boy once had. His instinct was to make something, to build a small structure out of words that could carry him through. The child who could not speak had become a man who, staring down death, chose to tell his whole story rather than let the silence win. The memoir was not written like a final confession. It wandered. It remembered actors' mistakes, food, work, family, wine, fear, and the absurdity of being recognized for a role involving creatures that had never existed in human time. That looseness was part of its honesty. He was not arranging his life into a clean moral lesson. He was gathering what he could while time felt uncertain. The title itself, Did I Ever Tell You This?, sounded less like a monument than a conversation at a table. One more story before the evening ended. He also wrote one of the lines most often repeated after his death. He was not afraid to die, but it would annoy him. The humor mattered because it prevented bravery from becoming performance. He did not claim serenity. He wanted more life. He wanted work, family, vines, animals, arguments, and another morning. Annoyance was a modest word for that hunger, and perhaps a more honest one. Stay with us, because the disease that arrived in 2022 is not where the story ends. In fact, the most extraordinary chapter of his fight was still years away, and it would arrive with a piece of news so hopeful that its timing would become almost unbearable to think about. But to understand why the world reacted the way it did when he was gone, we first have to understand who he had already become in the eyes of millions. And that story does not start on an island full of dinosaurs. It starts in New Zealand. Almost no one outside New Zealand had ever seen on a screen. Before the world knew Sam Neill's face, New Zealand barely had a film industry for him to belong to. So when his real breakthrough came, it came home in a film that mattered as much to a country as it did to a career. That film was Sleeping Dogs, released in 1977. It was one of the first significant feature films to come out of New Zealand in more than a decade, and Sam Neill was at the center of it. For a young actor who had drifted in from the stage and from television, it was the moment the door finally opened. But notice where the door opened. Not in London, not in Los Angeles. At home in the small, barely existing industry of the country that had taken him in as a 7-year-old boy. His career began exactly where his life had been rebuilt, on the far side of the world from everything Hollywood considered the center. 2 years later, in 1979, the wider world began to take notice. The Australian director Gillian Armstrong cast him in My Brilliant Career, a film that would help define the Australian and New Zealand new wave of cinema and push both Neill and his co-star Judy Davis toward international attention. This was Sam Neill as audiences outside the Southern Hemisphere first encountered him. Not an action hero, not a blockbuster face. A serious, watchful, intelligent presence in art film, a man who could hold the screen with restraint rather than force. That is a crucial thing to understand about him. He was a character actor who happened to be handsome, an artist first, long before he was ever movie star. What followed was a slow, unglamorous accumulation that a real career is actually made of. In 1981, he played Damien, the grown Antichrist, in Omen 3. The final conflict, proving early that he could carry a large, English-language genre picture. He moved between worlds with an ease that few actors manage. He could stand opposite Meryl Streep in Plenty in 1985, and again in A Cry in the Dark in 1988. Playing a pastor accused alongside his wife in one of Australia's most notorious real-life trials. He was building something that critics would spend decades trying to name. The film critic David Thompson would later capture it beautifully, describing a Sam Neill who always seemed to be there in large films, watching the star or the dinosaur with kind of basic common sense, and then, if you looked again, revealing himself to be a wry, watchful actor of considerable intelligence. Then, in 1989, came the film that would quietly change everything, though not in the way anyone expected. It was a taut thriller at sea called Dead Calm, and it paired Sam Neill with a young Australian actress named Nicole Kidman. The film worked. It was tense and controlled and frightening. And somewhere out in the world, one particular viewer was paying close attention. A director who was, at that moment, trying to figure out who could anchor an enormous, untested, effects-driven film about dinosaurs. That viewer was Steven Spielberg, and what he saw in Sam Neill in Dead Calm was the reason he would soon offer him a role that would define his public life forever. He also proved very early that he was willing to make strange choices. In 1981, the same year he appeared in Omen 3, he gave one of his most unsettling performances in Andrei Zulawski's Possession. The film was feverish, disturbing, and nothing like the respectable leading man career he might have pursued. Neill did not protect a polished image because he did not yet have one, and perhaps because he never wanted one. He moved toward difficult material, toward characters who looked controlled while something underneath them was breaking. That quality would follow him for decades. Television gave him another kind of recognition. In Riley, Ace of Spies, first broadcast in 1983, he played the real-life adventurer Sidney Riley and earned a Golden Globe nomination. The role asked for charm, calculation, and a kind of emotional opacity. It also widened his audience. Long before DR, Alan Grant, viewers already knew the particular Sam Neill effect. A man could appear composed, even elegant, while leaving you uncertain about what he might do next. The next year, in 1990, Neill appeared in a genuine box office hit, The Hunt for Red October, playing a Soviet submarine officer beside Sean Connery. Step by step, film by film, he had moved from the tiny world of New Zealand cinema to the edge of global fame. He had done it without ever quite becoming a Hollywood creature. He was about to become one of the most recognized faces on the planet, and he was going to do it characteristically on his own terms. The 1990s could easily have trapped him inside the success of one franchise, but he resisted that by choosing work that pulled in opposite directions. He entered the nightmare machinery of In the Mouth of Madness, the haunted science fiction of Event Horizon, and more intimate dramas that asked for restraint rather than spectacle. Some films were hits, some were not. He did not build a career by protecting a perfect record. He built it by continuing. That endurance matters more than any list of credits. For more than 50 years, Sam Neill remained employable because directors trusted him, audiences recognized him, and other actors knew he would give a scene weight without trying to steal it. That may explain why his face became familiar even to people who could not immediately name him. He appeared in submarines, country houses, royal courts, police stations, spaceships, vineyards, and prehistoric parks. The settings changed. The effect did not. He brought a grounded intelligence into stories that might otherwise have floated away. When something impossible entered the frame, Sam Neill often became the person whose reaction told the audience how seriously to take it. But before we get to the dinosaurs, we have to talk about the cost. Because while Sam Neill's career was climbing toward the center of the world, he was making a series of quiet, deliberate choices to keep his real life as far from that center as he possibly could. And those choices shaped a family that he himself would one day describe as somewhat haphazard. Here is the paradox at the heart of Sam Neill's life. The more famous he became, the more determined he was not to live where fame lived. And nowhere is that clearer than in the story of his family, which was loving, complicated, scattered across the world, and stitched together in a way that looked nothing like the tidy Hollywood picture. The complications began early, before the fame, before almost anything. In his very early adulthood, long before the world knew his name, Sam Neill had a son named Andrew. It was not a situation a young man in that era was equipped to hold, and the boy was placed for adoption. For years, that was simply a fact carried in silence, the kind of private wound that never makes it into a magazine profile. Only much later in life did Neill reconnect with Andrew. The exact timing of that reunion has been reported differently in different places, so it is enough to say the honest thing. Many years after the boy was given up, father and son found their way back to each other. It was a reconciliation that had to cross decades of absence, and the fact that it happened at all tells you something about the man's capacity, late in life, to repair what had once been broken. As his career rose through the 1980s, so did the rest of his family life, in its own irregular way. In 1983, he had a son, Tim, with the actress Lisa Harrow. Then, in 1989, he married the makeup artist Noriko Watanabe. 2 years after that, in 1991, they had a daughter, Elena, and Neill did something that reveals the shape of his heart. He adopted Maiko, Watanabe's daughter from an earlier marriage, folding her fully into his family. For children from different chapters, different relationships, different corners of his life. He would eventually describe the whole arrangement, with typical self-deprecation, as somewhat haphazard, blaming the scattered structure on the demands of an international acting career that was always pulling him somewhere else. And this is where the central choice of his life comes into focus. Sam Neill, at the height of his fame, did not want to raise his children in Los Angeles. He could have. Every incentive in the industry pointed toward moving to the center, planting his family there, becoming a permanent fixture in the Hollywood machine. He refused. He kept his real life anchored in the Southern Hemisphere, on New Zealand soil and Australian sets, close to the land he had come to love. He was willing to fly to the work. He was not willing to move his life to it. For an actor at that level, it was almost heretical. Fame wants you close. Fame wants you available. Sam Neill kept fame at arm's length, and he did it on purpose, because he had already decided what mattered more. That decision cost him something, and he knew it. A career lived that way meant constant travel, long absences, a family perpetually being managed across time zones and oceans. The marriage to Noriko Watanabe would eventually end. The two separated in 2017 after decades together. He was not a man who arrived at old age inside a perfect, unbroken family portrait. He arrived with family that was real, which is to say imperfect, scattered, repaired in places, still tender in others. But do not go anywhere, because the thing protected all those years, the reason he refused Los Angeles, was about to reveal itself in the most unlikely form. In the same year the whole world learned his face, Sam Neill quietly put down roots that would outlast the fame entirely. Neill never tried to sell that arrangement as a moral victory. Refusing Hollywood did not erase the cost of absence. Work still took him away. Relationships still changed. Children still learned not to expect a father at every dinner. Home was not a perfect family photograph. It was the place he kept trying to return to, even after everyone else had learned how to carry on without waiting at the door. That meant airports, hotel rooms, missed dinners, and a family spread across time zones. His phrase, somewhat haphazard, was not a joke that made the strain disappear. It was an honest description of love surviving poor timing, distance, adoption, separation, and mistakes. He had not preserved a flawless domestic life. He had preserved the possibility of return. His children and grandchildren also gave old age a structure that acting could not. Public interviews suggest a man who enjoyed family, without turning it into a publicity campaign. He acknowledged the disorder in the family history, including the son he had not raised and later found again. He spoke about 8 grandchildren with the bemusement of someone surprised to become the elder at the center of a large, scattered clan. That role did not erase the years he had missed. It placed those years inside a longer life, one in which reunion remained possible. He spoke about 8 grandchildren with the bemusement of someone surprised to find himself the elder at the center of a large, scattered clan. Old age did not erase the years he had missed, but it gave the family a longer story than the missing years alone. Reunion remained possible, and he never pretended that possibility was the same as perfection. 1993. Remember that year, because it holds the two halves of Sam Neill in perfect balance, and almost no one noticed at the time. In 1993, Steven Spielberg released Jurassic Park. And Sam Neill, the wry New Zealand character actor who had spent nearly 2 decades building a career at the edges of Hollywood, was suddenly its center. He played Dr. Alan Grant, the paleontologist summoned to an island off Costa Rica to inspect a theme park full of cloned dinosaurs. It was a role that would follow him for the rest of his life, and beyond it, the wide-brimmed hat, the denim shirt, the red neckerchief, the look of a man staring up in disbelief at something that should not exist. For an entire generation of American moviegoers, especially those who are now in their 50s and 60s, that face became one of the most familiar faces in the world. And he almost hadn't been there at all. Grant was not a role Sam Neill had chased or campaigned for. Spielberg had thought of him because of Dead Calm, that tense little thriller from 1989. One film had quietly led to another, and now Neill was standing at the absolute center of global popular culture in what would become one of the highest-grossing films of its era. He would later reflect, with his usual dryness, that it was probably a little late in life to be learning these things, but that he had finally figured out how to be an action hero. He said it as a joke, but there was truth in it. He had never set out to be that. The world had simply reached out and made him one. Now here's the part that tells you who Sam Neill really was. In that exact same year, 1993, the year Jurassic Park turned him into a household name, Sam Neill did something that had nothing to do with Hollywood at all. He founded a vineyard. He called it 2 Paddocks, and he planted it in Central Otago, in the rolling hills of New Zealand's South Island, not far from the landscape where his life had been rebuilt as a boy. It was not a celebrity's vanity project, a name slapped on a bottle by a marketing team. He ran it as a serious, working organic and biodynamic winery, producing Pinot Noir and Riesling. The obituaries written about him would call him a vintner, not as a footnote, but as a genuine second identity. He once described the place, with characteristic honesty, as a ridiculously time-consuming and money-consuming business, one he would not do if it were not so satisfying and fun, and which he added, got him pleasantly drunk once in a while. The work also forced him into a slower relationship with time. A film could be completed, released, reviewed, and replaced within months. A vineyard refuses that speed. Vines have to be planted before anyone knows whether the vintage will be good, whether it cannot be negotiated with. Results arrive years later, sometimes after the person who began the work has changed completely. For a man whose career depended on constant movement, that rhythm offered something Hollywood rarely could: continuity. Two Paddocks was not just where he escaped fame. It was where patience became visible, season after season, in rows of vines that would keep growing whether a camera was present or not. Stop and look at what happened in that single year. In 1993, Sam Neill became, in the eyes of the world, Dr. Alan Grant, the man running from dinosaurs on a Hollywood soundstage. And in that very same year, on the other side of the world, he put his hands in the dirt of the South Island and planted something that would tie him to that land for the rest of his life. Two halves of one man. The face the world would remember, and the home the man would return to. He himself would come to describe his existence as roughly half performance and half rural life. Half spent pretending to be other people on sets around the globe. Half spent farming, growing wine, tending animals, standing on his own ground. The world only ever really looked at the first half. It saw the movie star, the dinosaurs, the blockbusters, the familiar dry smile on 100 red carpets. But if you want to understand why his death landed the way it did, why prime ministers and fellow actors reacted not just with respect, but with a kind of personal, aching loss, you have to understand the second half. You have to understand that the most famous paleontologist in movie history spent his real life as a farmer, a winemaker, and a man who had quietly decided, decades earlier, that no amount of fame was worth surrendering the place he called home. That is also why 1993 should not be remembered as a simple triumph. Jurassic Park gave him the kind of fame actors spend careers chasing, but also fixed him permanently in one image. The Piano, released the same year, showed almost the opposite man: jealous, wounded, controlling, and capable of terrible violence. One film made audiences trust him in a crisis. The other showed how frightening restraint could become when love turned into possession. Few actors could carry both parts of that contradiction in the same year. He kept working because he liked the work, not because he was trying to fend a brand. In the years that followed, he moved from the cosmic terror of Event Horizon to television histories, family dramas, thrillers, comedies, and New Zealand stories. He could play a villain in Peaky Blinders, a weary patriarch, a government official, or a man lost in space. The range was not a campaign. It was simply the life of an actor who never believed one successful role should be allowed to own him. By the time Sam Neill returned to DR, Alan Grant in Jurassic World Dominion, almost 30 years had passed since the first helicopter landed on Isla Nublar. The hat was back. Laura Dern was beside him again. Jeff Goldblum was nearby. For audiences who had carried Jurassic Park since childhood, the reunion felt like a family photograph brought to life. But the scene meant something different when viewed against Neill's own life. Alan Grant had always been a reluctant man in the center of a spectacle he did not ask for. He preferred fossils to fame, evidence of performance, and open ground to corporate ambition. Sam Neill understood that kind of man. Hollywood had placed him inside one of the largest entertainments ever made, but he kept looking for a way back to ordinary ground. The original film had also asked Alan Grant to do something he claimed not to want: care for children. At the beginning, Grant is visibly uncomfortable around them. By the end, he is protecting them, sleeping beside them, and holding a family together long enough to get everyone home. The role did not predict Neill's private life, and it should not be forced into autobiography. But it gave audiences a lasting image of him as a calm adult in a frightening world, the man you wanted nearby when the ground began to shake. That arc is one reason Alan Grant endured. He was never written as a fearless superhero. He was an expert who understood enough to be afraid. He studied creatures that had vanished millions of years earlier, then found himself trapped among living versions of them, tried to keep 2 children alive while every system around him failed. Neill played that tension without grand speeches. The fear sat in the pauses, the watchful eyes, the way Grant kept moving even when he clearly wanted to be anywhere else. 30 years later, the image became harder to separate from the actor. In 2022, audiences saw the older Grant step back into danger and stand beside Ellie Sattler again. They saw nostalgia, reunion, and survival. What they did not yet know was that Neill had noticed a swelling in his neck during that same publicity period and was about to enter a fight no costume could contain. The man famous for guiding others through impossible danger was quietly being asked to do the same for himself. That does not turn Jurassic Park into prophecy. It simply changes the way the performance feels now. Grant's calm was never the absence of fear. It was a decision to remain useful while fear was present. Sam Neill seemed to understand that distinction long before illness made it personal. That image followed him through very different work. In The Piano, also released in 1993, he played a man whose need for control became cruelty. In Event Horizon, he became the scientist who brought a terrible force home. In Peaky Blinders, he played Major Chester Campbell with cold authority. And in Hunt for the Wilder People, released in 2016, he became Uncle Heck, a grieving, difficult man who slowly builds a bond with a boy the system is ready to discard. Again and again, his best roles return to the same tension. Control against chaos, distance against attachment. The solitary man forced to decide whether he will protect anyone but himself. Off-screen, he turned that seriousness into comedy. On social media, the night actor and international star appeared as a farmer surrounded by animals with ridiculous celebrity names. There was Laura Dern the chicken, Kylie Minogue the duck, and Helena Bonham Carter the cow. He once reported, with perfect deadpan timing, that Meryl Streep had been killed by a ferret and reduced to a small pile of feathers. It was silly, gentle, and completely unlike the machinery of celebrity publicity. That may be why people felt they knew him. The films gave them authority, intelligence, and danger. The farm gave them the man who laughed at all of it. He had gone from a country with barely a film industry to more than 150 screen roles, major international productions, an Arts Foundation Icon Award, and a knighthood. Yet the public version he seemed happiest sharing was the one standing among vines and animals, making a joke no publicist would ever have written. One later role brought the home theme into especially clear focus. In Hunt for the Wilder People, Neill played Heck, a rough, grieving man who does not know how to care for a foster child and does not want the responsibility. The film sends him into the New Zealand bush, where survival slowly becomes attachment. It is funny, unsentimental, and rooted in a landscape that is not decorative. The land gives the 2 characters space to become a family on terms neither could have managed indoors. For audiences who only knew Alan Grant, the performance revealed another version of the same strength. Not heroic confidence, but the slow decision to stay with someone. He also used his own voice to tell stories about New Zealand and the Pacific. Documentary work allowed him to step out from behind fictional characters and speak directly about history, migration, land, and national identity. Those projects were not side notes. They belonged to the same lifelong question that began when a 7-year-old left Northern Ireland. How does a person understand the place that formed him, and how does he speak about it without pretending the story is uncomplicated? This is a part of the story that is almost too painful in its timing. Because Sam Neill's last chapter was not a slow fade. It was, right up until the end, a story of hope. His cancer had not simply vanished after the first treatment in 2022. Chemotherapy brought remission, but Neill was told the medication might eventually stop working. When it did, he entered an Australian clinical trial involving CAR T-cell therapy, a treatment that modifies a patient's immune cells so they can recognize and attack cancer. The procedure was not a miracle sentence, and Neill did not present it as one. It was another attempt after the first plan had failed. For him, it worked well enough to produce the scan he would discuss in April 2026. In April of 2026, Sam Neill sat down for a television interview and delivered news his fans had hoped to hear. A recent scan, he said, showed no cancer in his body. He called the result extraordinary and spoke with visible excitement. Then he shifted the attention away from himself. CAR T-cell therapy remained expensive and difficult to access, and he argued that other blood cancer patients in Australia and New Zealand should have a better chance to receive it. Relief became advocacy. His own reprieve became an argument for someone else's survival. He was already looking forward. "It's time I did another movie," he said. The line matters because it was not the language of farewell. He had projects, curiosity, and work still in front of him. His family would later say that his death was sudden and unexpected. No public cause was immediately announced. The only responsible thing to say is what the family said. He had remained cancer-free, and the loss arrived without the long public goodbye many people assumed illness would provide. But the most revealing thing about his final months was not the medical news. It was what he chose to fight for once he had his life back. Because in early 2026, Sam Neill was not resting quietly. He was standing up publicly and fiercely for the land around his beloved vineyard. A company had proposed an open-cast gold mine near Central Otago, close to the hills where 2 paddocks had grown for more than 30 years. Neill spoke out against it, warning that it could damage the region's ecology, its tourism, and its wine economy. He even released a short documentary opposing the project. He was careful and precise about what he was actually saying. "I'm not against mining," he insisted. "I'm against this mine." A New Zealand government minister publicly called him wrong and anti-Kiwi for his stand. Some who supported the mine reportedly threatened him. He did not back down. Sit with what that tells you. After years of treatment, he could have withdrawn from every public argument. Instead, he placed his name and reputation behind a dispute over the hills near the place he loved. Home was not a decorative metaphor for Sam Neill. It was land with boundaries, water, vines, wildlife, neighbors, and consequences. He was careful to say he was not against mining in principle. He opposed this mine in this place. The distinction was typical of him, measured in tone, stubborn in purpose. His relief did not remain private. He used the interview to argue that other blood cancer patients should have access to the treatment that had given him more time. Then he turned back to Central Otago. For Neill, recovery and the fight over the proposed mine belonged to the same question. What should a person do with time he was not certain he would have? His answer was to protect what made returning worthwhile. His final public appearances carried the same outward ease. On June 11, 2026, he attended the Aria Hall of Fame event in Sydney and appeared smiling in photographs with musicians and friends. Around the same period, he shared a small farm update about harvesting olives. He also celebrated a silver Logie nomination for the 12. None of those moments proved anything about his health, and they should not be treated as medical evidence. They simply explained why the announcement felt so abrupt. The last public images were not images of retreat. They were images of participation. That is what makes the news of July 13th so hard to hold. Because just weeks after that, the man who had said there was no cancer in his body was gone. When the news broke, the grief came from every direction at once, and the shape of it told you exactly what kind of man the world had lost. It came, first, from the highest offices of two nations, which is itself remarkable for an actor. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, remembered him as wry and dry, thoughtful and laconic, and said that Sam had fought his illness with the same dignity, humor, and conviction that gave strength to his every performance. He would be much mourned and long remembered, the Prime Minister said. The New Zealand Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, called him simply one of the greats and pointed to the deeper truth of his career. He had started out, Luxon said, when there was barely a film industry in the country to speak of, and over more than 50 years he had taken New Zealand's stories to the world and helped build its film industry into one of the nation's greatest cultural exports. That is not how prime ministers usually talk about actors. That is how a country talks about someone who helped define it. Then came the voices of people who worked beside him, and their grief was rawer and more personal. Magda Sabansky said she was absolutely devastated and emphasized that the last time they spoke, he had been going so well. Rebecca Gibney wrote that she was in utter shock. Rena Owen asked people to tell her the report was a scam. Toni Collette remembered a hero and a sweetheart. Richard E. Grant, Colin Trevorrow, Alan Cumming, Carl Urban, Kylie Minogue, Nicole Kidman, and others described a man whose warmth had mattered as much as his talent. Their words varied, but the portrait did not. Younger performers mourned something more personal than a famous colleague. Teresa Palmer, who had played his daughter, remembered that he called her kiddo and spoke of a man who understood how to live. Directors recalled his calm on set and the way he made other people feel capable. Industry organizations praised the scale of the career. Friends kept returning to smaller qualities: generosity, humor, humility, kindness. They did not need to explain the dinosaurs. Everyone already knew the movies. What shocked them was the absence of the person who had made difficult rooms feel easier. The pattern in those messages was unusually consistent. People remembered that he arrived prepared, listened before speaking, and made room for younger actors instead of reminding them who the star was. On a set, those details matter. A famous actor can make a difficult day heavier, or he can make everyone else feel that the work is manageable. Neill seems to have done the second. The grief was not only for the performances that would never come. It was for the atmosphere he created around the work. For viewers, the loss worked differently. Many Americans had never met him, yet they had trusted his face since 1993. Alan Grant was the adult who stayed useful when every system failed. The hunt for Red October gave him another kind of quiet authority. Hunt for the Wilder People showed the tenderness under the reserve. Different generations carried different versions of Sam Neill, and the tributes brought those versions into the same room. For American audiences, the grief carried one more layer. Only months earlier, Neill had appeared again with Laura Dern and Jeff Goldblum in a lighthearted commercial that depended entirely on the affection people still felt for the original Jurassic Park trio. Goldblum had said that when they reunited, it felt as though no time had passed. Dern described the characters as relatives. The advertisement was not a farewell, and it should not be rewritten as one. That is precisely why it hurts. It captured three familiar people together, relaxed and playful, before anyone watching understood that the frame would soon become impossible to repeat. That image also explained why the loss crossed age groups so easily. Older viewers remembered him opposite Meryl Streep and Sean Connery, or as the elegant danger at the center of Riley, Ace of Spies. Families remember the first Jurassic Park as a shared night at the movies. Younger audiences found him later in Peaky Blinders, Hunt for the Wilder People, or clips from a farm where a chicken could carry the name of an Oscar winner. Very few actors remain recognizable across that many different memories without becoming trapped inside a single public personality. Neill managed it because the roles change while the man viewer sense underneath them remained steady, intelligent, skeptical, slightly amused, and never desperate for attention. The tributes were therefore not asking people to discover an overlooked career. They were helping people realize how long he had already been present in their lives. For most of the world, Sam Neill will always be Dr. Alan Grant, the man in the hat, staring up at the dinosaurs, the calm and reasonable center of the storm. That is how he arrived in millions of lives, and that is how many will remember him. And there is nothing wrong with that. It was a wonderful performance in a film that gave a great deal of joy. But now you know the other half. You know that the same year the world learned his face, he put his hands in the soil of the South Island and planted a vineyard he would tend for the rest of his life. You know that at the height of his fame, he refused to move to Los Angeles because he would not let Hollywood raise his children or define his home. You know that he named his chickens after movie stars, wrote a memoir to give himself a reason to live, and spent some of his final healthy months standing between a mining company and the hills he loved. The dinosaurs were how the world remembered him. Home was what he spent his whole life protecting. He was born Nigel in Oma, a child who often preferred silence because speaking could become a struggle. He died Sam Neill, a knight, a father of 4, a grandfather of 8, an actor, a filmmaker, a farmer, and a winemaker acclaimed with affection by more than one country. He had spent his life deciding which parts of himself belonged to the public and which parts would remain his own. Fame gave him a face millions recognized. It never managed to take possession of the man behind it. Rest in peace, Sam. The vines will keep growing in Central Otago. The animals will still carry their ridiculous famous names. The hills he defended will still rise beyond the vineyard. But the man who made all of it feel like home is gone. The world remembered the dinosaurs. He kept returning to the land. And in the end, his family was there around him. Perhaps that is why the loss reached beyond film fans. Sam Neill represented a possibility that becomes more precious with age. Success does not have to erase the place you came from. A public life can still contain private ground. A person can remain useful, funny, and rooted even while the body becomes uncertain. There's a difference between owning land and belonging to it. Ownership is written on paper. Belonging is proved by return. Neill returned after films, after marriages changed, after treatment, and after the world had turned his face into popular memory. Home was not where his life began. It was a place he chose, tended, defended, and kept coming back to. Now we would like to hear from you. Where did you first meet Sam Neill? Was it as Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, as a villain in Peaky Blinders, aboard the submarine in the hunt for Red October, or in one of the many other roles across his 50-year career? Leave your answer in the comments, because a life like his deserves to be remembered in all its many forms, by all the people it touched. And if the story moved you, if it made you think about what it really means to hold on to who you are and where you come from, take a moment to leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it tells us these stories are worth telling. Subscribe so you never miss another one. And before you go, tell us what city you are watching from tonight. There is something powerful about knowing that people from every corner of the world are sitting together with the same story, remembering the same man, a man who never forgot where his home was.